Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. As a college football fan, we just got a treat. Now, I think it starts with these are two of the best teams in the country, two of the best offensive minds in Kalen DeBoer and defensive minds in Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart. Just absolutely going to battle. And I think where you got to start with this football game is I have a feeling that we're going to see this football game again at some point down the road, whether it's an SEC championship game, whether it's a college football playoff game. Two of the best teams in the country, Alabama coming out on top. Dill, Jalen Milroe in the first half, that was about as efficient and about as perfect of an offense as you might see. It is really hard to make Georgia just look like a JV team on defense. That's what Alabama did. Like, it wasn't only scheme, but the players were making plays. You can tell Kalen DeBoer spent the last 2 weeks just absolutely in the lab, drawing out what was the perfect game plan in that first half. Now, credit Kirby Smart in Georgia. You saw some really good adjustments in the second half as well. Carson Beck started to get it going. Let's dive into what we saw in that football game, some of the good, some of the bad from both of these teams. Now, before we get into it, as always, Alabama fans, Georgia fans, just college football fans who just experienced one of the better 3.5, 4 hours that we'll get all year. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. Biggest takeaways, let it fly. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, without further ado, I'll give you the T box here. You texted me and said you got takes to get off your chest. Where you want to start?
I mean, the thing that stands out is Alabama was able to do very similar things to what they were able to do last year at times, and they did it much more effectively. But taking the sting out of that Georgia defense and almost getting them to slow down, getting their aggression down, and then just being able to methodically march them and then hit plays when they had the opportunity. That's like textbook what I think Alabama would have wanted to do. And I think you said it right. I mean, credit to Georgia. They went to that 3 down lineman set. They did some things, and then they got Jalen Milroe. Not flustered, but they really started to disrupt him in that second half. I almost want to see that game replayed again because I don't even really know what to think in terms of who's better. Obviously Alabama came out on top, but I think you kind of said it. That's a game, certainly, I feel like anyone would want to see over.
Yeah, if I could see that game every single Saturday night, I'd say you can sign me up for that pretty damn quickly. And I think more importantly, like that's just two of the best teams in college football, arguably the two best teams in college football going to battle. And again, I think we're going to see this game at some point down the road. Dill, let's start with Jalen Milroe, but I think more importantly, let's start with Kalen DeBoer and just creating an offense that is so perfect for Jalen Milroe. Really, I think the reads are really clear. You can tell Jalen Milroe is not thinking as much as he did last year in 2023. Now, I think partially that's just development from Jalen Milroe.
And I think that's a good point. Like, he is playing much, much faster. I mean, the ball, he was never really holding the ball, maybe a little bit in the second half, but that first half is exactly how I think you want to see him making quick, decisive decisions. And when he's playing that way, he's just too explosive, too fast to really deal with at a high level and consistently stop.
I think my second takeaway is when Jalen Milroe's playing like that, you also have, in my mind, legitimate difference makers on the outside. Like, it is the year of true freshman wide receivers, like whether it's Jeremiah Smith, whether it's Cam Coleman, whether it's Ryan Williams. And the Alabama fans have heard plenty of how good Ryan Williams is. We saw that on full display in this football game. Having that X factor that can win vertically down the field and kind of make those game-changing plays, that kind of feels different in terms of what Alabama had in 2023, where they had quality pieces.
You can't play a single high safety look with them.
No.
I think they've only he adds a dimension into that game where he almost changes how schematically you need to attack this Jalen Milroe led offense, because last year they just didn't have that guy. I mean, if you were a really good secondary in Michigan or Georgia, you really didn't fear anyone going down the field vertically on you. Now with Ryan Williams, I mean, when the ball's up, it's not a 50-50 ball for him. He's really dynamic, and he's really forcing some changes that I think are really going to benefit.
Yeah, and you talk about you can't play single high against Alabama. That's important because it's really hard to stop the run when you're going with two high safeties. And that kind of makes this Alabama team so difficult to attack where, look, there's so many ways they can get at you. Dill, I think I have two other kind of things in my notepad that I want to talk about. Number one, Kalen DeBoer really playing with the eyes of this Georgia defense. This Georgia defense just for lack of better terms, I think Georgia fans would agree with this in the first half. They looked confused, like they were playing slow. It was a lot of pre-snap motion. It was a lot of different personnel groupings and formations. That's the best way to attack Georgia. Now, granted, it is very hard to make a Georgia defense look confused because that is one of the most prepared units you'll see every single Saturday under Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart. Kalen DeBoer won the first half. I mean, these were two programs that had 2 weeks to kind of script this game out. Kalen DeBoer won by a landslide. Not only were the Alabama players just playing better football, but I thought from a coaching staff perspective in that first half, it was so heavily weighted to Kalen DeBoer in this. And quite frankly, we're going to talk about the defense too, but it was so heavily weighted to this Alabama offense. And when you can kind of have Georgia thinking a little bit and having their eyes in the backfield and not playing with their instincts, that's you talk about getting the taking away the sting from this Georgia team. That's kind of how you do it. One, you do it with Jalen Milroe, one of the best athletes in all of college football. But I think secondly, you do it with a lot of different looks, a lot of different pre-snap motion. That play when they sent, I believe it was Jam Miller in motion. CJ Allen follows him. You know you have man coverage. And you just have kind of a walk-in touchdown. Jalen Milroe puts it right where it needs to. Like Kalen DeBoer was dialing it up, so Jalen Milroe didn't have to think. Second note I have, Alabama's pass protection has been at times a problem.
Really good.
It was freaking awesome today against Georgia.
And they were picking up blitzes for the most part. And then I think Georgia did start to get home a little bit again when they started to go to that 3-man defensive line and really getting a little more aggressive with the linebackers. They started to get a little bit, but I think you're right. They weren't losing a ton of one-on-one matchups. And that was one of the things I think I would imagine a lot of Bama fans were a little concerned with, because you did see, frankly, even Caden Proctor had some issues in one-on-one pass protection. Obviously, Elijah Pritchett's had hits in the past, but today they both played really, really well, and they weren't getting beat one-on-one. When they got home, it was nicely drawn up pressures and blitzes, but they really weren't losing a ton of one-on-one battles.
This will be the first time I've ever said this, and I think it probably will be the last time too. Malachi Starks did not have a very good football game. And I think you could say that for a couple of players on that Georgia defense, but that's been one of the best players in all of college football for the last 2 years and 4 football games. Not his best performance. And again, it's hard to win these kind of games when your best players aren't making big time plays. Let's flip over to this Alabama defense. And again, you talk about winning the first half. Coach Womack. I mean, again, Carson Beck's a hard quarterback to make look confused. Carson Beck was seeing ghosts out there in the first half. Now, granted, Carson Beck's a really good football player, and he came out in the second half and looked significantly better. This Alabama secondary, by far the biggest question mark we had for this Alabama team heading into the 2024 year. Yeah, you know they're young, and you can see it at times. But, man, this group is so talented. And even when Carson Beck was making some throws in the second half, there were not a lot of throwing windows that were created. This was a massive question mark for Alabama. I'm coming out of the first, 4 football games that we're into and saying, this is a pretty damn good secondary that Alabama has.
No, and obviously they gave up a little bit on some one-on-one matchups for sure when they got caught in some of those man coverages where they just got a good matchup from Georgia. Yeah, they did get beat on a couple of those, but I think one thing that really stood out to me with what Womack's doing, and maybe even in comparison to what Alabama was doing last year, or last under Nick Saban, let's say, is they really vary what they're doing on defense a little bit more. And I think that did do a lot to disrupt Carson Beck. I mean, that first half, it felt like he was seeing one coverage and they were giving him something else. And you saw the confusion, almost like what Kentucky was able to do to him at times. I think that's one difference that stood out, where even last year, like there were some plays that you could kind of go to, whether it was getting to running back into the flat or some of those mesh concepts that Alabama, you kind of like historically knew would have trouble with, given the way they played defense and how difficult that was to cover in that kind of set, that pattern match set that Nick Saban liked to run. I think Kane Womack, obviously, he's really out there more playing games with these offenses. And I think especially with that young, really, really talented secondary, I think that's allowing them to make some plays. And it's not just putting them in a position where we'll just guard this guy one-on-one every play and make something happen. I really like the way they're using a young, versatile, but really, really talented secondary.
Yeah, young, but you said versatile, and I think that's important. Like, you can do so many things with these cats because they're so athletically gifted. And then You talk about a guy like Xavier Brown, and like, yeah, he's a true freshman. Most of the reps on, in that football game, like that looks like a polished cornerback that's been playing college football for 4 to 5 years. We kind of knew that about him coming out of Mater Dei. Like he's coming out of one a powerhouse, but you take a look at the high school film. What did we say when Xavier Brown committed? This kid's not only really physically gifted, and that's why he's a 5-star, but this kid is ready to step on a college football field and make a massive impact. That's what he's done. Jalen Mbakwe can say a lot of the same things, and having a veteran like Malachi Moore who can do so many different things, kind of.
They might have a legitimate one in Domani Jackson. I mean, that is not the way he was playing at USC.
Yeah.
Obviously, very different system, but he's playing some big time football. I kind of like the moxie he has, the attitude he's bringing to that back end of the defense. So that they're getting real, not just steady play, but really high level cornerback play from him. I think is huge for that.
And we said that about Domani Jackson when he committed to Alabama in the portal. Like this kid's a 6'1", 200-pound, 10'5" in the 100-meter cat that is checking every single physical traits by. If you wanted to build a cornerback in a laboratory, it's probably spitting out a guy like Domani Jackson. The big question was, can he put it together? In his third year, kind of getting away from USC, I think we're getting our answer. Looks like an all-SEC cornerback. Looking at Georgia, well, one other thing I want to note, you noted the versatility in the back end. You also saw a lot of different looks in the front. Georgia did not run the football particularly well in this football game. Now, granted, they didn't have a ton of opportunity to run it. Like you kind of blinked your eyes and you were down 28-0. So you were kind of throwing the football for most of the second half. That being said, when you outrun Georgia 2-1, 80-173, that is a recipe to win football games. Looking at it from a Georgia perspective, biggest concerns going forward. And again, I think you loved what you saw in the second half if you're Kirby Smart in Georgia. And if you're a Georgia fan, like, yeah, this loss, it freaking sucks. Like, there's no way around it. But you know this is a team that can win a national championship. Particularly on offense, my biggest question mark that still doesn't feel like it's answered is when the moment's the biggest and you're struggling in the first half and you can't get anything going on offense. It was normally, all right, where's Brock Bowers or where's Lab McConkey, and let's get it going. Who's that guy for Georgia? That was our biggest question mark coming in, and we kind of said it'd have to be a committee approach. That being said, I don't know if you're getting a guy to necessarily emerge. Like Aaron Smith had some really good plays, but he's also an extremely inconsistent football player. I'm 95% confident that that interception Carson Beck threw in the first half was supposed to be a screen that would probably have been a big hitter if Aaron Smith knew what was going on. And so you look at it and say it's a lot of talent, but it's not necessarily a guy that's stepping up and being that difference maker for Georgia when they need it most.
And that's probably the biggest concern, especially because they're not running the ball nearly as consistently as I would have thought. I mean, they couldn't
No.
really, and they got it going at times. And there were a couple drives where I was like, okay, that's a physical, good, solid drive that I'd kind of expect out of Georgia, but they can't lean on it the way I almost would have expected them to be able to lean on it. And I think that's a huge thing going forward is somehow they got to find it because obviously Carson Beck has gotten into some real trouble spots where he's looked really, really uncomfortable. And today it kind of spiraled on him in that first half.
Yeah, I'm not too worried, but I'll say this: like, I'm not that worried about Carson Beck. But this is the Georgia team that's won national championships. Like, they were winning national championships largely what this offensive line can do and what this rushing attack can do. It's something that Georgia's always been able to lean on, especially like kind of like what you said when the offense is struggling. Let's get the ground game going. Let's settle everybody down. I don't know if that's the thing Georgia can lean on. I think that's kind of the whole conversation we're having is what can you go to? Because inevitably you're going to run into the situation where your offense is sputtering and you're not really in rhythm. What can you go to kind of find that rhythm? And again, I don't.
Because once they can get cooking, I mean, you can see they get rolling and guys start getting involved.
Yes,
Playing really well. I think Lost Lucky needs to be their primary tight end.
I think he's gonna
That's a
be.
weird one. Oscar Delp, I thought really struggled. Did not look
Yeah.
the way you need your Georgia tight ends to look. So I imagine Lucky's going to be the kind of guy going forward. But I think you're right. Like they need somebody to be able to pull him out of ruts because if they can do that, their offense, when it's humming, it's really, really humming. They have guys, Colby Young's making plays, Dominic Lovett's making plays, Trevor Etienne making plays. So like they can really get themselves rolling. But that probably will be that last open question for me with Georgia is who is going to be that guy to step up and be that kind of alpha dog in the
Yeah,
play.
what happens when you're not rolling, and who's going to be the guy to get you out of the rut? On the defensive side of the football, and we'll cut this soon. We're going on almost 15 minutes. It's midnight. A step slow for Georgia on defense, especially from the linebackers. And we said the linebackers would need to have a really good football game. Like Jalen Milroe in this Alabama rushing attack puts you in a lot of conflict. It did seem like Georgia at the linebacker spot did seem a step slow. And I'm not, again, this is something you don't normally say when you're talking Georgia defense. Alabama was able to get out on the perimeter. And again, these linebackers are all sub 11-second guys in the 100-meter dash. That being said, I think you kind of saw some young linebackers and even some of the veterans like Munden. I didn't think played his best football game specifically in that first half. And I think my last takeaway, the cornerbacks gotta be better with the football in the air. Like there were a lot of times, I think, quite frankly, both sides. And you saw some wide receivers make some plays, but when that football's in the air, specifically Georgia, it just seemed like they weren't making plays on the football that, again, you're used to talking about Georgia cornerbacks making those kind of plays.
Yeah, and even having some shots, I think, to make some big plays, whether it's breaking on the ball a little bit harder, taking it away. Obviously, I think Starks had two. I think that probably
Yeah.
in a different game he may be able to get a takeaway like that
Yep.
type of thing. I'm not super worried about Georgia's defense because when they dialed it in and they started sitting on them, they really started to roll. I felt like, and they were playing fast, and the linebackers seemed like they were getting a little more engaged. CJ Allen started to make some plays, but yeah, it's a little concerning, frankly, to come
And
out the way they came out because they really got boat raced.
I think one of the tough things is like, all right, Georgia, you got to make adjustments quicker in this football game. The Georgia, it was just no complimentary football because
their offense couldn't stand the field.
Their offense couldn't stand the field. So it's like, all right, hey, we just got a really big stop, and then Carson Beck turns it over. You're going right back out to the field. All right, hey, we just gave up an 80-yard touchdown drive. Let's get 5 minutes, take a look at what we're seeing from this Alabama, get on all the tablets that you're allowed to have on the sidelines. You're probably like 2 minutes into this conversation. All right, get the helmets on. Georgia's punting. So,
but at the end of the day, given how that first half went and the way they kind of battled back, I mean, again, Georgia's right in it. I have
100%.
very few doubts of what this team can be when they're really rolling. But I think you're right. At the end of the day, to me, the big thing is they need to figure out who their guy is on offense because that's 2 straight weeks for them. That's Kentucky. That's the Alabama first half that they didn't really have that guy to lean on, and they got to figure that out. I don't know who it's going to be. I still kind of think it's going to be Lovett, but somebody's got to go make it happen and be that guy.
Biggest takeaway from this football game is that if you told me these two teams are playing for national championship and an SEC championship in the next couple months, wouldn't be shocked. Dill, we'll cut it out there again. We'll probably dive into this football game a little bit more Sunday morning, maybe Monday morning. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Hope you all have a good night, late night for the boys. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.